I'm going to go ahead and get started with a little bit of like introductions and housekeeping this morning as people are still joining, and then we'll dive into the conversation with Jen today. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining. My name is Andrea Chui. I am the Director of Planning for Navy Pier here in Chicago. And shameless plug, Navy Pier is a nonprofit cultural institution that offers free programming to our 8 million guests each year. So I hope you come on down to the pier and check out some of the programs. But I'm also a member of AFP Chicago, and I have the pleasure of leading the API Affinity Group this year. And joining me today, I want to give a shout out to Jay Hobart, who is also on the Zoom. Jay is also AFP member and API Affinity Group member and the Director of Development for Civic Federation. And she is kindly helping to moderate the chat today. So feel free, as we're going through, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. And at the end, we'll save about 10-15 minutes for Q&A once Jen gets through her presentation. So thank you, Jay, for moderating the chat today. And I also want to acknowledge our friends at Asian Americans Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy, APIP Chicago, as well as Asian Giving Circle. Both groups kindly helped promote this conversation and bring us all together. So thank you to APIP and AGC. We're very grateful for your partnership. Now, before I dive into Jen's introduction, I just want to take a moment and share the Land Acknowledgement and Brave Space Agreement that AFP Chicago has kindly put together. So I've shared on the screen, and I'm going to just take a moment to read this for you all who might be on the phone or might not be able to see the screen. But AFP Chicago recognizes that the land on which we live and work includes the traditional homelands of the Miami, the Sauk, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Our city is today home to more than 40,000 Native Americans, and by acknowledging the land, we recognize that it holds significance for its original stewards, the Native nations, and people of the region. And now the Brave Space Agreement. In order for us to communicate openly and honestly, AFP Chicago proposes a brave and safe space agreement. The agreement is that all participants will help to create our space while bearing in mind these principles: that we keep focused, notice power dynamics in the room, create space for multiple truths and norms, be kind and brave, be mindful of the space you take up, examine bias systems and processes, and look for learning. So, thank you for indulging me as I read those statements. And I think look for learning is a great kind of jumping off point for today's conversation, because I think you're all here because you have curiosity and are hoping to learn something today. And as I mentioned, Jay will be moderating the chat, so put your questions there and we will get to them at the end. And so with that, I want to just kind of dive right in to why we're all here today and introduce Jen. So it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Jen Shang. Jen is the world's first PhD in philanthropy, and she is the world's only philanthropic psychologist. So first and only. Currently the co-founder and co-director at the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy, which we'll get into that organization in a bit. She'll share about what she does in her research. But her research has been covered in the New York Times, by the BBC, The Guardian, The Chronicle Philanthropy, Advancing Philanthropy, and the Nonprofit Times. And her academic appointments have included positions all across the world, including in the UK, in China, Singapore, and a little bit closer to home here in Chicago at Indiana University's O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs and the Lilly School of Philanthropy. So with that introduction, Jen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So grateful that you're here with us today, joining us all the way from Plymouth, UK. So it's the afternoon for Jen, and we so appreciate you helping us start our morning here in Chicago.
Absolutely.
So Jen, with that, I'd love to start the conversation with a few questions that are going to give everyone here a bit of context for you and your background and your focus into Phil Psych. So I really wanted to start with a question because in looking at your CV, Jen, I saw that your undergraduate and then your master's degree are actually in psychology. So then I'm wondering if you can share with us how you kind of found yourself also in philanthropy, if you stumbled upon it or if that was like an intentional direction that you chose.
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for being here. Also, a very warm welcome, and it's very nice to see at least some of your smiley faces on the screen. And if you want to turn more of your smiley faces on, please do feel free. It's always nice to look at smiley faces when you smile back. So anyway, yes, as you're very observant, Andrea. I don't often have people read out my CV to say, oh, by the way, you have psychology and psychology and psychology. Yes, I do. Because when I started my study in psychology, I originally wanted to do clinical psychology. I thought, oh, I'm gonna sit in the room and help people when they have problems. And then one semester into college, I was like, oh no, can't sit in a room and talk to one person. so, so I switched to cognitive psychology, which is about as far away from clinical psychology as you can get in psychology, which is about learning and perception and how people see colors and how people remember words, how like particularly Chinese students learn English. So I thought, oh, that's safe enough. I don't need to sit in a dark room and talk to one person anymore. But then when I come to the US, I was at Carnegie Mellon University, where I met absolutely the most fabulous mentor I could dream for, Herm Simon. He got his own Nobel Prize in bounded rationality. And when I was doing my cognitive psychology study, he just encouraged me to find something that matters to me. So if like there's a seed that a great mentor planted in me, I would say, well, that's the seed, right? So when I go to him and talk about my research topics, it was never about, okay, what is the latest method? What is the latest ideas? What are publishable? Like as you hear in the academic, you're like, oh, it's about publication, publication, publication. That's how you get your tenure, and so it goes on. That's not how he guided me. He just, I didn't see him that many times, but every time I sit in his office, he always look at me and like this. Like, so Jen, what makes you happy? Good question. And that's how I discovered philanthropy, because I listened to public radio a lot. And I was like, that makes me happy. So and they have fund drives, and I was like, that does not make me happy. So let me make my happy place happier by working with public radio in fundraising. So that's how I found philanthropy.
Wow, that's fantastic. So when you in your research or in your work then started to connect philanthropy and psychology, it sounds like you were kind of the first one to make this innovation.
Yeah.
Was there skepticism, pushback? I mean, how did you kind of forge this path forward?
Well, it's I would say this, until the day I die, the Lilly School at Indiana University is just such a beautiful birthplace for love, really. Like when you go through the program like I did in my PhD program, we have the privilege of spending 2 years reading about love. How can life get any better? You read about love from anthropology, history, ethics, philosophy, public policy. Yes, there's love there. And then psychology, sociology, economics, from all these disciplines, where, because I've already had so much psychology in me, I know all the methods, but they're all dead methods to me. I was like, yeah, I can design an experiment and find some results, but wow, to apply that to grow love, that makes a life. That's not just a career anymore. It's like, yeah, this is life. But until the Lady School's PhD program, the planet Earth actually doesn't have a PhD program that's going to focus on philanthropy. So people like me who learn all these, methods and way of thinking and theory of mind from all other disciplines, they just don't know that they can actually apply all of this into the domain of philanthropy. So that PhD program is the first place where interdisciplinary training was possible. So I was just really, really lucky to be amongst the first ones where I was given this luxury of spending 2 years reading about love, carrying all my methods, and then giving birth to this discipline called philanthropic psychology. I mean, because how I was breeded, it is quite natural for me to bring the two together. But if there's not such a place where you can do these things, I don't know how people would make it up, right? It's not like every day you walk around and say, here are two disciplines, build them together, right? It just doesn't happen that way. But if you are in that environment, it's like, well, that's the only way possible. So yeah, that's how it was built.
That's great. And I promise this won't be a big commercial for IU, but it is a great school and program if anyone is interested. But maybe we
Yeah.
can stay here just for a moment with like your origin kind of story and where and your background. And I would love to ask before we dive into phil psych, as you were coming up with this new discipline or connecting these two disciplines together, like I want to know just a bit personally, like, did your family, were they like, Jen, you're crazy, connecting two new things, or were they excited for it? I'm just wondering about, how your parents like reacted to this creation of a new field study. Mhm.
Yeah. Now that you ask the question this way, I actually finally begin to see the wisdom of all the beauty that fits together. How should I describe it? My family, like many, 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 the majority of Asian families have very high expectations for their children, right? So when you grow up, like by age 3, you should have your, pass for PhD sorted, which school you go to and which discipline you should be studying and how you're going to earn your living and earn a family name. And I'm in the same category. But at the same time, I have 2 absolutely remarkable parents who named my Chinese name, no matter what, you're going to be happy. So I think like when you see their heart in my name, you would know that, whatever I choose that make me happy will make them happy. So even though like it's not necessarily in their culture or my upbringing to say, oh, you can just be happy. No, you need to study. But they once they see just how deeply joyful that this discipline has made me, they can see that I'm living the life that they wish me to live. So yeah.
That's fantastic. And as you mentioned, there's kind of some expectations around the Asian culture. So I wanted to stay there for a moment and just ask, how has being, ethnically Asian impacted your career in your field of study? I know you said you came to the U.S., I believe, as an undergrad. And, how has that impacted your career in academia and philanthropy?
Um, on a very superficial level, I came to the US when I was 20, so I finished my undergraduate. I started to graduate in the US. I recognized about 5 years ago that for the first 5 years when I was in the US, I actually didn't know what I didn't know. Like I'm hearing English, but I'm not hearing English, if that makes sense. I actually didn't know what I was hearing. But it took a long, 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 long time for me to know that I didn't know. And I didn't really know like if there is other way to grow, like when you're in a new culture other than just to grow in it. I think sometimes things just take time. And for me, it was not until after I moved to my third country in the UK for like now I'm in I was in the US for 12 years and I'm now in the UK for 14, right? So I lived in 3 countries, and all of which I had longer than 10 years of experience. And it is not until after I lived for longer than 5 in the UK that I recognized for the first 5 years when I was in the US, I didn't know what I didn't know. So, like learning happens like really in all stages of life, I would say.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's really fantastic to hear about your background. And maybe we can transition now. I think everyone here is probably anxious to hear a bit more about Phil Psych and just what exactly is this mysterious field of study. So I think Jen has a few slides she's going to show us and kind of walk us through. I think starting at like a 30,000-foot view, and then she's going to bring in some examples. But Jen, I'll give you the floor. Just, what is Phil Psych? Please tell us about it.
Yeah, I will share my screen. Can you see it okay?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, awesome. So, very literally, we all know philanthropy is the love of humankind, and psychology is the study of the human soul. In modern psychological terms, I focus on the study of people's sense of who they are. But literally, if you just put the words together, Phil Psych, philanthropic psychology, is the study of how people love people. And I was just teaching the RSPCA last week, so it is okay that people love animals and the planets too. The reason why like philanthropic psychology study how people love people is because a lot of the planet and animal problems are also people problems. So if we could work out how people love people, that's a pretty good step forward. But really, when we talk about the L word, in philanthropic psychology, I made it quite explicit that it is not just about the study of how we love our other people, but how we love ourselves. And we can think about this from an individual perspective, but also an organizational perspective, in the sense that when nonprofits begin to think about what our mission is about, very naturally, very easily, we think about how we love the people who need help, like people who suffer in disability, people who suffer homelessness, people who have needs. But very rarely, like in our first instinctive reaction as a nonprofit, we also think about how do we love our donors and how do we love ourselves? Because being kind to people is almost by definition, we exclude ourselves from that sphere of being loved. And that is what the first principle that we were applying when we try to think about what are the most important topic to study. We want to choose psychological principles that are applicable to not just how we love the people we support, help, or nurture. It also, we're talking about how do we care for ourselves and how do we care for our donors who also love and help and support. So whenever there are principles that could be applicable to all 3 groups of people, those are the principles that we study first. And the second thing that we wanted to make sure that we do when we talk about how people love people is we are committed not only to study the loving as an action or the receiving of love as an action, but also the person behind the love. We want to always travel a mile deeper into understanding holistically who is the person doing the loving. And once we define the people involved in a loving relationship, we then keep ourselves accountable to define what love actually means. And we think that is the very first step that we should keep ourselves accountable for if we're serious about growing love and growing giving at the same time. So most of the research that we are doing have this focus of understanding who people are, and you can download all these reports from our Centers Institute's homepage, where we study in the context of mass giving, how do people define themselves and how these identity lead to giving. Also in the context of high and ultra high net worth individual giving, how do people define themselves and how these definitions impact on giving. Why is it so important for us to understand the person behind the who and how they experience and express love in giving? Is because we believe it can lead to psychological well-being through giving. So it's not just we can raise more money, we can also raise how good people feel, not only about their giving, but also about their own lives. So the same set of research, whenever you see any research coming from our institute, we will understand who is the person behind giving, we'll understand how that understanding can translate into giving, but you will never see us report any results without measuring people's psychological well-being alongside of their giving behavior. So we would always want to test out factors that will simultaneously increase giving and how good people feel about giving. And those research reports are from the last 5 years of our studies. Now, this year, we're really zooming into the concept of love, where we're gonna just really go after these central concepts. But let me stop there for a moment, Andrea, if you want to ask me more questions, and then I'll go on to any other examples that we might think is the best example. I have a whole bunch of them stacked up. I can just go to the one that we think we're most interested in.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Jen. I think that's really helpful to see those slides and to understand this is like a really deep dive into the people behind the giving, right, before they become donors.
Absolutely.
And it's just a perspective that, you know, we don't often see. So I'm grateful that you're here to share it with everyone today. And so maybe before we dive into those examples, I would love for you to share with everyone just maybe a bit more about the creation of the Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. And it sounds like you're very much, you know, a research-based institution. But I guess if you could describe a bit, like, how are you different than other fundraising consulting firms? And, you know, if people are interested, can they take courses or their seminars?
Yeah.
I'd like to give people that information.
Yeah, absolutely. So we named our Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy. And as far as I'm aware, that is the only one of its kind, again, on the planet. That's why we're doing these once in a while, once in of its own kind things, because we think it's needed. And the reason why we think is needed is because sustainability of people's love is such a crucial topic, especially in the age that we're seeing fewer and fewer donors are giving and retention rate are not increasing as anybody has hoped. And the need for gifts is not decreasing, but increasing. Like, all of these factors point to the necessity for philanthropy, not only to be sustained, but to grow. So our institute was founded to generate the kind of science that can help grow the human capacity to love. And then one of the consequences we hope that this science can do is to then grow giving, but grow giving in a way that is sustainable. So when giving is truly sustainable as a hypothesis, we think every giving action that people take should make it to be more likely for them to give again, not less likely. So every action of giving should energize people instead of drain them. So those are the kind of case support that we're helping nonprofits to build, so that when people give money, they feel like they wanted to give it even more after each action of giving. So that's why we have the institute. But in terms of how we want to walk this philosophy out, or this building of the science out, is we are growing ourselves into an organization where we always put our people first, and we would do that even in the expense of having to slow down the degree to which our mission can be achieved. And that includes not only our team members, our tutors, our volunteers, but also all the students who come to us and learn with us. And I think that is the key difference between us and any other consulting firms, where we see our students and our people as our success. So we're not a consulting firm to come in to tell you, oh, if you do this project, or if you buy this product, you'll get money, or we're going to do the work for you, or any other offerings that consultants would be able to make. We don't make any of those. We say, you're a person, you come to us, we give you a little bit of seed, but how you use it, what you grow, success are all yours, right? So for us, as long as we impart the seed in the science that we do well to our people, that's all we promise them. We don't make any more promise than we'll help you grow to be the best fundraiser you can possibly be.
That's wonderful. And I've seen that you offer a few things, like I think I saw most recently a grant like copywriting course, and people seem really energized and excited by what they learn, which you don't often see coming out of like a grant writing course. So I think there's you're doing something right. There's something different about your firm. But maybe now we can dive into some of those examples to give people a little bit more of a concrete understanding, less abstract, right? Let's kind of show them with your examples you have teed up about how this has, practically been applied with some organizations they might even be familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very proud to say that these are all productions of our alumni from our various courses. So these are people who have taken our 8-week philanthropic psychology course or 4-week copywriting course. And sometimes with an organization, they put teams through one course after another just to make sure they've got enough resources to digest the information. And there are other organizations where they work through the courses first, and then they engage in their donor research, and then they implement a organizational transformation process. So the example I share with you, they're all from our alumni. So let me start with this first example from USA for UNHCR. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Oh, here it comes. Okay.
Okay. So like I said at the end of my introduction to philanthropic psychology, we should be keeping ourselves accountable for defining at least what love is. So there are two types of love that at the moment that we teach in our courses is compassionate love versus companion love. Compassionate love is the love that we have for people who are so different from us that we would think them as out groups. So we're thinking about them as others. So compassionate love cross out group boundaries to people that we think as others, versus companion to love is the love we have for in-group members who are similar to us, who we would favor over out-group members. So in fundraising, we can identify these two different types of love if we put this lens on. If we don't necessarily see them. But if you do, and like Anne-Marie's team at U4U did, they would recognize that a fundraising page that looks like this, where we talk about people who are hungry in Yemen, in 5 words, do you think the way that donors relate to this little girl would be through a in-group love or an out-group love? Quite immediately in 5 words, we're telling people, well, you're not hungry and you're not in Yemen. You don't look like this. So there's no, like, we don't need to say anything else. We don't need to do anything else. Immediately, like 5 words, 1 picture later, we're staring at someone who are out-group members. And when we are doing it like that, we can say, I'll send urgent needed shelter, protection, hope today, and the donate, like very classic. Here's the problem, here's the solution, here's the call for action. If you don't put this lens on, you're not going to see any problem, because it's just so classically taught. In fundraising, we need to say what the problem is. We need to tell people what the solution is. And there's the call for action. I need to be urgent. And there's no room for anything else. Let's just get the money in. Or at what expense? Right? Instead, if you put your words like, keep the families warm. So you're not staring at people who are hungry and people who are hungry in Yemen yet anymore. You are looking at families who need to stay warm. Well, that is something we can connect to, because in our everyday life, we're trying to keep ourselves and our family warm, fed, comfortable, transported, doing different things on time. So with 3 words versus 5, fewer words, but closer connections. And even more brilliantly, how are they going to talk about the solution? Well, send life-saving winter supplies and aid to strong refugee families trying to make it through this bitter, cold winter. So it is not that they don't talk about the problem. They do. It's bitter, cold winter. It is a big problem. But you are not solving this big problem for an out-group member. You are solving this big problem for a strong refugee family. Why is the word choice strong here? Because they did a donor survey. They asked the donors, what are the top 5 words you use to describe who you are? And one of the top highest frequency words donors use to describe themselves is the word strong. And then they go back to their cases to portray their refugees to say, okay, can we authentically, legitimately, honestly use the word strong to describe our refugees? And they go around the table and they tell the story. And the story they tell is, well, people have been experiencing conflict in Yemen now for 8 years. And what do the parents do? They have a little bit of bread and tea every day. They give all the rest of the food to their children, and they care about their education. Are these strong refugee families? Absolutely no question asked. So they feel like 100% authentic to help their donors see themselves in the people they help. So it doesn't matter at this point whether people click on the donation button or not. The mission of the organization has succeeded through these words, because simply by the fact that people are reading these words, they are seeing themselves in a group of people that they were not seeing themselves in. And that's how their mission can succeed. That they are creating this love between people who are on the website and the people they could potentially help. So at this point, yes, when donation follows, they will have financial success, but this kind of message support their mission success first and foremost, and create an environment where love can grow. And in this case, both companioned and compassionate love can grow, because companioned love is when people see strong families, and compassionate love is that it is strong family in bitter cold winter. So there is similarity, but there is differences. So they are creating the opportunity to grow two types of love instead of just one type of love in the first case, which is compassionate love. And this kind of practice doesn't have to be applied in isolation or squeeze out other best practices. It is possible for people to double your love, double your kindness, double your hope in conjunction with other fundraising techniques that we use, like matching grant. So really what it takes is a way of thinking about love and thinking about the relationship between love and giving, for giving to grow in this loving way. I'll stop there for now. And we can have more examples once we take a couple questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Jen. I think that is really helpful to see the example in practice, and probably, hopefully, sparking ideas and curiosity with the attendees today in some of their own work and their own solicitations. And maybe before we dive into another example, I think let's talk about some kind of behavioral changes, like what could we do in our work today, you know, to make our own fundraising more effective? Like, is there something we should stop doing and start doing that, maybe we could pick up this afternoon or tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we do in our love project this year is to dive really deep into how each organization can grow their compassionate and companioned love. And the reason why we wanted to do it in a organizational level is because we found even organizations from the same sector, each organization's love language is different. So exactly the same 4 RSPCAs can have entirely different language of love. So it's not a case where if you're an animal charity and you can just look at how other animal charities love, it's not like that. And the reason is because how each RSPCAs can love is determined by who your donors are. Because every RSPCA have a different donor base, each RSPCA is speaking a different love language. But just as a way of looking at your own communications, one very, very simple exercise that you can do with any piece of communication you have is you count and you list out all the words in your communications that you use to describe your donors. And then you count and list out all the words that your communications use to describe your beneficiaries. And then you put them side by side and you mark out how many of those words overlap. And then if you're really brave, you mark whether they're positive or negative words. And then you'll be staring into the reality of the kind of love you create in your own fundraising communications. in some organizations, when you do this exercise, you will see the majority of the words you use to describe your donors, or even all of them, are positive, versus very often you will find organizations where the majority of the words used to describe their beneficiaries are negative. And this is not by design. This is not like, oh, I want to talk about my people this way. No, like when you describe them in need, devastated, with disaster stricken, like those are just the word we use to describe bitter cold winter. So what it takes when we examine our communications in that way, at least it gives us a mirror into looking at how we are mirroring our donors and our beneficiaries back and forth between them. And that will open up some reflections, some open question sessions for you to think about, do we want to grow the percentage of positive words that we use for our fundraisers, for our beneficiaries? And if so, what are the best words to grow? And why do we want to grow them? Because they open up different opportunities to love. So I think if there's only one thing you can do and there's only 5 minutes you have, then just pick out the most successful fundraising communication you have and mark those words out and have a reality check of the kind of love and the kind of world that you're creating with your fundraising communication.
That's great, Jen. Thank you. I think that's an exercise we could all probably do today, and could be really eye-opening. But you're right, we'll all have to be brave to take a look at our work with that lens. I know we have a lot of questions coming in the chat, so I want to be sure we have a little bit of time at the end to go through some questions. And so Jay, feel free if there are any that you feel are good to ask now, or if we want to save them. But maybe, Jen, if we could do maybe one more example before we kind of dive into that next portion.
Okay. So I'll continue the example with the you for you for now then. So what I just shared with you about you for you is on their homepage. They obviously have also changed their other donor communications, including the newsletter they send out. So in the newsletter they send out, based on the same survey, they know care, compassionate are amongst the high frequency words that people use to describe who they are. But they have also experimentally tested to see which identities would be the strongest predictors for giving, as well as the highest predictor for people's psychological well-being. During the time of COVID, they found that the American identity gives people a really big boost, not just to increase their giving to help others, but how good they feel about their own well-being. So they designed their newsletter's headline with "Because You Care," your newsletter exclusively for compassionate Americans who care about refugees. So these big print mirroring words don't have to be changed for all the issues. Once they've got the survey evidence done once they have put it onto the title once, they can stay there. So it's a very efficient way to think about how to mirroring your donors back to themselves. But when they started the journey, they changed their format to this much more consistent format, and they have smiley faces for refugees to look at them. But look at their headline here. They are still primarily focusing on the problem. Winter and the pandemic close in when violence broke out. So their acknowledgement and thank you communications sound and feel like their solicitations. It doesn't feel like it's something that the organization is giving thanks to the donors. So they don't have a mechanism to really replenish their database and try to nurture the additional resources that donors have in their own psychological well-being to keep up with giving. So as they evolve their way of writing, not only they're changing their big print, they're also changing the stories they have. So they're portraying Ginny, who is a long-term supporter of refugees, and Mary, who arrived into the US 5 years earlier without being able to speak any English. But then 5 years later, Mary is now managing Ginny's shop for her, and she is teaching new refugees how to speak English and help manage their program. And the title here is Sweet Home, Pennsylvania, Your Kindness at Work in the Best Smelling Shop in Town. Right, so what people are looking into is compassionate love grow into companioned love, where, you know, at the very beginning, Jenny is helping Mary as, you know, an American helping a foreign refugee, but now the foreign refugee has become the host who help other refugees. And this applies to other stories they tell, like this refugee doctor. So their headline says, her undefeatable spirit, and then your persistent compassion. So if you look at all the stories and all the headlines of all the newsletters that you created since they adopted this approach, in every headline, within about 7 to 10 words, you always see the love of the refugee and the love of the donor come side by side, right next to each other. And it's just absolutely beautifully heartwarming. And it's just, this is like my all-time favorite. And I begin to see this kind of example from other organizations. But this is Abdullah. His school was bombed when he was 8. He spent the next 10 years of his life in refugee camps. What does he do now? He's training to be a paramedic. During COVID, he is taking care of Americans. And when it said, welcome to America there in the headline, is Abdullah saying, welcome to America. And it's just this beautiful, beautiful storytelling of identity transformation and love transformation, whether eventually people sending money or not. This kind of communication is helping them creating the kind of love that they would like to see for their refugees. Let me also share with you an example from the beautiful Shawnee Field. And she's also training her team, putting her team through our various programs and doing the donor surveys a few years apart. Not only they have increased their retention now by about 80%, I think, if you look at the cumulative numbers, but the most beautiful thing that they found in their 4-year apart pre and post test is that for every dollar people intend to give, they now feel 3 times better. So if we do take these things seriously, we can keep ourselves accountable for measurable outcome to both grow people's well-being and their degree of loving. But in this particular context, in the animal world, for her particular BCS PCA, their donors consider their animals in groups, and sometimes pet owners out groups who neglect their animals. And in their fundraising communications, if they didn't have this idea of companion and compassionate love in their mind, you would often see sentences that sound like this. Does it make your blood boil to hear that this sweet, loving, faithful dog was abandoned in the cold? Before Phil Syke this is perfectly acceptable. But after phil psych, they begin to ask themselves, are we actually othering the people, the very people that we want to help? Because they see animal welfare as a social justice problem. Many people, they can't take care of their pet because they suffer problem of poverty themselves. They can't afford pet insurance. And there's no amount of philanthropy that can even buy 1 year of all pet insurance in BC. It's more than $1 billion a year. So their root solution to their root problem is to help the humans who suffer social injustice. So they didn't want their fundraising communication to inevitably cause the othering of the very group of people that they want to help. So they begin to shift as much as possible their messages into one where they talk about how how donors and pet owners can stand together and love animals. They begin to say that everybody is animal lover, whether you're a donor or you're a pet owner, you can't afford health insurance, you can't take care of your own dogs, and you have to be brave to ring the RSPCA and let us help you take care of your pets. So they begin to tell that kind of story with the hope that over time, they can begin to grow the love that their donors have for pet owners and only leave the deliberate abusers into the category that are portrayed in the kind of message of anger. But if you look at the cases that the RSPCA get, only 5% of all their cases coming from deliberate animal abusers. All the rest of them are coming from people who really, really want to love their animals, but are not in the position to.
Thank you, Jen, for that additional example. I think people are really starting to see how they could apply this and how it seems to really have a profound effect in engaging and retaining your donors. I think we're coming to the end of our hour, so I know we want to have the last couple minutes for some questions. And I think Jay said we have a handful that have come in, and I think Jay will read a couple of questions for us as time allows.
Sure. And thanks, Jen. I think all of your examples really started spurring a lot of interesting questions. I know you kind of loosely answered some of them already, but just to loop back to, kind of the beginning of your presentation with us here today, there's a question about if you can share maybe any noticeable differences you've seen in the sustainable philanthropy in different geographic regions or countries. And so the example that's shared as a follow-up is, private philanthropy is important in Canada and the UK, but then, government support is supposed to be filling in the gaps that private philanthropy and nonprofits are expected to fill in the US. So if you have any comments on that, on sustainable philanthropy from a regional perspective.
So if we really go into the details of what is the kind of language of love that people speak in fundraising, we would say that every organization differs from each other. So it's not a regional difference or even a sector difference that we observe. But if you talk about how philanthropy is practiced and perceived in different parts of the region, we've taught in China, in Australia, in Canada, in Eastern Europe. I can tell you like every country is different, but the beauty of having a set of scientific language to explore this topic is that science only provides you with the concepts and the method. When you apply the concept and the method into each region, that you gain the insights that is valuable for that local market. So it is not so much about does the science differ in each region, but does the application of science yield different lessons in different regions? And I think the answer there is yes.
And then later on, when you were talking about the well-being in donors, do you think that for the increase in the well-being of donors, is that based on who's giving both money and time, or is that just measured based solely on financial giving?
at the moment is only on financial giving. We have not expanded our research into volunteerism or even sponsorship or subscriptions to services like in arts organizations. We have, like, whenever we study any other actions, we always compare them to giving. So our learning is always related to giving.
And then I know you shared a series of just good examples, right, of how to interact and show love both to donors and to the beneficiaries. But do you have any additional recommendations on how to show love specifically to donors and highlighting the impact of their donations?
Oh, absolutely. We've got like tons of courses on it. You can spend like however many weeks you want really to learn about those things. But we've got 3 minutes, so let me show you some very quick questions. And I mean, these slides I can spend half an hour talking about because there's so much more information behind it. But for now, very quickly, if you're examining your copy and you wanted to, you know, just put some words out there to say, what can we change? Well, instead of your donation count, say you count. That will switch the focus from the action to the person. Instead of thanking for your kind donation, thank for your kindness. That will switch the focus from an action to a person. Instead of saying our future is decided in the schools, you say our future is decided by people like you, because without people, there won't be any schools. So again, you're shifting the attention from the organization to the people. And then be really, really brave to say, instead of what we achieved, what you achieved. But these shifts shouldn't only happen between the actions that donors can take and who they are, but really think about the beneficiaries, if we still use that word. If you talk about leprosy, teasing, or even the disability caused by them, you are focusing on the problem and you are focusing on the things that are different from what the donors can conceptualize. But with a one word shift, you can shift a donor's attention from the problems to the person that they are looking into. And if you do that shift for your donors with very simple words in as many communications as you can manage, then they will naturally gravitate towards a way of thinking about themselves as people for you, not just a cash machine.
Thank you, Jen. And I know we're at time, so I'll kick it back over to Andrea to close this out. But this has been really, really fascinating and inspiring to hear from you. And your examples are incredibly helpful. I know changes I want to make at my own organization already. So thank you again.
Absolutely, you're more than welcome.
Thank you, Jay. And yes, Jen, those were fantastic examples. And thank you for answering the questions that came in. We are right at 9:30. And so before people start signing off, I want to let them know that we will be emailing out a recording of this session to all registrants, as well as, Jen, your slides, and then make sure that everyone has your information and ways to connect with you and the Institute of Sustainable Philanthropy to learn more. So, Jen, thank you so much for your time today. So glad we could connect you with all of these fundraisers and folks here stateside in Chicago. And we look forward hopefully to future conversations and maybe seeing you in person at like a future conference. I know you're often a speaker at the AFP Icon. So thank you so much, Jen. We appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for joining us today.